Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Kristin Kobes Du Mez, who is a professor of history at Calvin University and the author of A New Gospel for Women. She has written for the Washington Post, Christianity Today, Christian Century, and Religion and Politics, among other publications. And the latest book is Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. Welcome to Background Briefing, Kristin Kobes Du Mez.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And there was a rally in Tampa, Florida, over the weekend of Turning Point USA Student Action Summit, it was called. And by the way, in front of the convention center in Tampa, there were Nazi swastikas and SS flags, and mixed in with flags saying DeSantis country. And apparently the organization Turning Point repudiated the Nazis, but so far apparently the governor has not said anything. But what went on inside was, I think, probably just as alarming, where the representative from Georgia, the Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, argued that Republicans should embrace Christian nationalism. She went on to say, "We need to be a party of nationalism. I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists." So she's not exactly a particularly credible source in terms of theology, I don't think. But is she speaking about something that is, as some suggest, a clear and present danger?
I think she is. Now, she is somebody on the fringes. She's an extremist within the Republican Party. But I think a key question that we need to ask now and really over the last few years is, what is the connection between the fringe and the mainstream, both within the Republican Party and within white Christianity more broadly? And that's where it gets a little tricky to discern, because, in fact, a lot of white American Christians do hold to Christian nationalism. They think that America is a Christian nation, that God blesses America when the country is obedient to God, and that Christian America needs to be defended against enemies, external and internal. And these are widely held views. Now, the extent to which one takes them, dissolving any separation between church and state, kind of tossing aside our democratic norms and institutions, that's up for question. But broadly speaking, these are popular sentiments.
And how do they compare to dominionists? I mean, for example, Senator Ted Cruz's father was a white Christian pastor who propagated the kind of idea that Jesus Christ should be the head of state.
Mm-hmm. Dominionists think that kind of right-believing Christians, it's their duty to seize control of all aspects of society. So government, education, so the public school system, culture, and that it is their God-given duty to bring each of these kind of mountains of culture of society into alignment with God's laws. Now, Christian nationalists may also be dominionists. Some Christian nationalists would not take things that extreme. And so it gets very muddy, because for a long time, dominionism was kind of a term that a lot of people who may have accepted the basic teachings didn't embrace. The same was actually true for Christian nationalism until recently. There are very few people who would have self-described as Christian nationalists. It's more a term that others would use, sociologists, for example, to describe a collection of beliefs or values. Now we see both of those shifting, with people openly embracing dominionism and openly claiming to be Christian nationalists and saying, not only am I proud to be a Christian nationalist, but you all should be too.
So there's an article at CNN, an imposter Christianity is threatening American democracy. And you're quoted widely in the article, Kristin. And it's clearly, when you talk about Christianity in this country, the white Christian nationalism is largely in the evangelical arena, and Christianity, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but there are Catholics and Methodists and Presbyterians and Anglicans, etc. So there's quite a broad swath of religion, and I don't believe that these white Christians speak for Christianity in its broadest sense. So when you talk about the Constitution and we the people, what percentage of we the people are we talking about here?
It's really hard to get a precise number on that. And first, I'll say that yes, Christian nationalism has a very strong foothold within white evangelicalism, but also within white Catholicism and into the white mainline as well. And when we're talking about numbers, it's, we're working with what we can glean from survey data. And there's different questions that different scholars put together to try to suss this out. But we're looking at, I don't know, between a quarter to maybe a half of white Christians who are going to hold to these views, some of them more extremely, and would be termed ambassadors of Christian nationalism. This is from the work of Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry. But then there's another group that can be seen as accommodators. And so these are people who are not the Marjorie Taylor Greenes or the Lauren Boeberts out there in front, but these are more of your ordinary Christians in the pews who are sympathetic to their arguments, who have been taught now for generations in their churches and through Christian media that America is God's special nation. And the real question is, how many of these folks are there? It's hard to get a number on. And also, where will they draw the line between the kind of extremist representations that are very much anti-democratic and the more kind of general sentiment, but they will only take things so far? And that is a very open question right now.
And again, I'm speaking with Kristin Kobes Du Mez, who's a professor of history at Calvin University and the author of A New Gospel for Women. She has written for The Washington Post, Christianity Today, Christian Century, and Religion and Politics, among other publications. And her latest book is Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. But you argue that they're already having a profound effect within the clergy, inasmuch as white Christian nationalist beliefs have infiltrated the religious mainstream, and Christian conservative pastors who try to challenge this ideology risk their careers.
Yes, in many cases, that's true. So this has been so deeply ingrained for generations now, even though it's getting a lot of media attention in this moment. These basic beliefs that America is a Christian nation and that it's up to faithful Christians to really defend the faithfulness of the country, that has been around for more than half a century in very clear forms. And so it's really become a popular movement and a populist movement. On the one hand, there are powerful entities behind the scenes. You've got organizations like the Council for National Policy. You've got networks. You've got a lot of money behind this. On the other hand, it has been so thoroughly embraced at the popular level by generations of Christians now that any one person, say a pastor, I hear from these pastors nearly every day. They write to me. I just got a letter a couple of days ago from a pastor who said, I was one of these people until suddenly there I was in church and I saw our 4th of July celebration. We had an American flag over the baptistry. And I thought, this is heresy. And when he tried to confront that, he didn't change the church. The church pushed him out, right? That's how this is working. And so it's very hard to turn the tide in any particular location.
So how do you combat this? How does mainstream religion, you would have thought that the Bible itself and the prophet Jesus would be sufficient. He didn't hate homosexuals. He didn't carry an assault rifle. He didn't celebrate capital punishment and so forth. And one of the mantras, of course, on white Christian right, amongst white Christian nationalists is that it's a white Christian country. The founding fathers founded the country on that basis. But of course, the founding fathers were atheists, Unitarians, deists, liberal Protestants. The spark of the revolution came from Tom Paine, who was an atheist, who famously said, "Belief in a cruel God makes a cruel man."
It's really hard to combat this just widely held belief because it's so infused the popular culture of evangelicalism, and it's been reinforced for so long from so many places. And so you can, Christian historians have been working to challenge these false views of America's founding in exactly the way you were presenting. But their books don't sell nearly as many as the Christian historians who are perpetuating this mythology, right? Christian radio, Christian television, it's just infused with these teachings. And yes, you can look at particular Bible verses, and Christians internally will have these debates among themselves. But this is not a kind of equal fight in that in many white Christian denominations, the resistors are really in the minority. And this is where that language that was used in the CNN piece of imposter Christianity is somewhat problematic. Because on the one hand, that's perfectly fine to claim that this is not real Christianity as a theological argument, and Christians will have this debate among themselves. But as a historian, I have to say this is, in fact, a very real and powerful manifestation of American Christianity, and it has been for a very long time.
So let's talk about this movement to white Christian nationalism and Donald Trump, inasmuch as so much of the theology of white Christian nationalists is based upon the Book of Revelation, and so much of the fundraising that goes on. I've often wondered why it is that there's such an investment in the end of the world, and much of what is propagated by these preachers who seem to be entirely focused on the Book of Revelation is a kind of spiritual pornography, because it means that people like me and everybody I know, we have to die in the lake of fire, and it's our burning flesh that allows them to rapture up to heaven. So it's pretty aggressive, isn't it? I mean, it's and their idea of a leader, which I think Donald Trump to some extent fits the bill. You describe him as being refashioning Jesus into a kick-butt savior. So let's talk a little bit about the vision of this kind of violent idea that only those chosen few are raptured up to heaven while the rest of us burn in the lake of fire.
Yeah, I was raised in a conservative Christian community, and not one that emphasized this kind of apocalyptic vision very much at all, in fact. And so here, too, there are kind of competing versions of Christianity, even within American conservatism. And so the Christianity that I was taught focused much more on restoration and on bringing about human flourishing and this kind of peaceful vision of what the end times would look like. So very much competing visions. When I was doing the research for Jesus and John Wayne, what I noticed is many of the writers in who were perpetuating these ideals of a very militant Christianity and a very militant Christian manhood to carry that out, were not drawing on the Jesus of the Gospels much at all. They were explicitly rejecting teachings like turn the other cheek, saying you can't teach a boy to become a man by telling him to turn the other cheek. And they were saying that, not in this time because the threat is so dire. And instead, they would look to the book of Revelation because that's where they could get this martial kind of imagery. And that's where they could get the kind of justification for the sort of ruthless seizing of power that they were already kind of, planning to take part in. And so, you can see this as both inspired by Christianity, or you can see the Bible essentially being proof texted and favorite passages just being plucked out that can justify their seizure of power.
So is there any way to de-emphasize the book of Revelation, which is pretty bizarre to begin with, and it's hard to follow, I should put it lightly, as opposed to the Gospel of St. Matthew and the Beatitudes?
Right, the Beatitudes, such a challenge to this image. We could look also to the fruit of the Spirit. What is the sign of being a follower of Christ? These are things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Now, this is in the Bibles that Christian nationalists are reading. And they're somehow able to just brush that aside. And they're able to do so again by pointing to, but this is a crisis moment. And by conflating essentially like true Christianity as they understand it, or faithful Christianity with worldly power. And so they are arguing that they need to control, our government, or that they need to carve out a space for them to live out their faith as they believe they are required to live it out. Now, this is where we come into conflict with democratic norms and institutions, because Christian nationalism privileges Christianity. And so when they're talking about protecting freedom and rights, they're talking about protecting their own freedom, their own rights to live out their faith as they see fit, and to essentially invite/coerce other Americans to abide by their rules. And so there is something fundamentally anti-democratic, both within this worldview, but also, I think more recently, in terms of strategy, because we're also witnessing, and in fact, in the last decade, started to see the demographic evidence that we are, in fact, encountering the end of white Christian America, in the words of Robert P. Jones. And that means that democratic measures will no longer be likely to achieve their ends. And so that's why we're seeing now, much more recently, fairly widespread abandonment of democracy in certain corners of the Republican Party, within American evangelicalism, among Christian nationalists generally. Things like, the Supreme Court appointments, the gerrymandering, voter suppression, and the Stop the Steal campaign. All of those are directly correlated with embrace of Christian nationalism.
So just in the last minute then, Kristin, we were talking earlier about Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. They are on the fringe, but they're increasingly becoming the face of the Republican Party, which is controlled by Donald Trump. So this is a big part of Donald Trump's coalition. And curiously enough, the one person who was brought onto the ticket, Mike Pence, who brought in the Christian vote, Trump was perfectly happy to have him lynched. I mean, is that not getting through?
It doesn't seem to be. I have not seen much reaction at all on that front among Trump supporters, among Christian nationalists generally. It's shocking, but in fact, there was evidence that should have pointed in this direction if we were looking years ago already, in terms of many conservative Christians were happy that Trump appointed Pence as vice president, but they much preferred Trump in the Oval Office than Pence. And so during the impeachment, at that point, it was very clear that the vast majority of Trump's Christian supporters had a strong preference to keep Trump in office and not replace him with Mike Pence.
Well, I thank you so much for joining us here today, Kristin Kobes Du Mez.
Thank you for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Kristin Kobes Du Mez, who is a professor of history at Calvin University and the author of A New Gospel for Women. She has written for The Washington Post, Christianity Today, Christian Century, and Religion and Politics, among other publications. And her latest book is Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into the Pope's visit to Canada, where he apologized to the Indigenous peoples, saying, "I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the Indigenous peoples. I'm deeply sorry for the ways in which, regrettably, many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppressed the Indigenous."